Julia, you've been checking on a new court filing against the ACLU on behalf of the children in separated families in that federal court case from ICE, I guess, the chief enforcement officer from ICE. Tell us what it's all about.
So, Andrea, this is the response that the government has for a petition that the ACLU said that they need about 7 days after these families are reunified so that they can get to them and explain their legal rights before they have to make the tough choice between whether or not to leave without their children or with their children. They would leave without in order to allow them to seek asylum. What the government is saying here is that they can't give the ACLU that 7 days because they're short on resources and space, and they frankly don't think that the judge can tell them to hold off on orders of deportation. So we're likely to see all that come to a head today when the two parties come before the judge at 6 p.m. Eastern.
Now, Jacob, I am really confused about this because we've been getting denials from all sorts of people. But the fact is, we're talking about people who are being given the horrible choice, Sophie's choice, if you will, of leaving their kids here or taking their kids and leaving, but giving up their right to hearings and asylum.
And in some cases, Andrea, that choice is not one that's even been apparent, according to the ACLU, to the parents when they're getting these forms to sign away their rights and essentially elect to be self-separated and deported away again from their children. Let's put this into a much larger context here, which is we're only 2 days away from the government-mandated deadline to reunite all 2,551 children that the government says were separated from their parents. We know that 917 of them, a huge number, have already been deemed ineligible to be reunited in the first place. So we're talking about a massive, I think that's 34% of all of the migrants and the children that came to the United States and were separated by this Trump administration policy. So now the challenge is what happens to all different kinds of subsets of these parents and children. We know that 463 of them as of yesterday, and we should probably get an updated number in the hearing, as Julia was mentioning today, may have been already deported themselves. So what happens, Andrea, if you came here with your child, the Trump administration separated you, and you're already back in your home country? You're not going to be reunified, that's for sure, with your child here in the United States.
Well, I mean, Julia, what's so incomprehensible to me is that there was no system in place to identify kids and parents to each have the same number, the same wristband, whatever you want to say, at the point of separation. That was not in place when this zero tolerance policy was first announced. Now that it's been done and that these kids have been sent all over the country and their parents in separate holding facilities, so why they didn't keep them all in the same region is another, big question. How can they say that children that parents should have to make this decision about giving up their right to asylum? Isn't the right to asylum embedded in our law, embedded in treaties, embedded in the Geneva Convention?
It is true, Andrea. I mean, I'm sure you saw Secretary Nielsen speaking to Peter Alexander at the Aspen.
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm asking this, because
right.
her answers were completely, with all due respect, muddled. They were all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Peter kept trying to nail her down on it.
That's true. We all saw that happen. I mean, the only parents that they can really guarantee will be reunited are those who are already in ICE custody, those who have been released into the United States while they seek asylum, or those who have been forced to deport. Those people are no longer really in what they would consider an eligible class. And we'll see all of that be debated in the next 48 hours in court. But it seems that they don't really have a system. And when Peter pressed her on it, she said, we're just trying to move as expeditiously as we can. But she would not commit to that timeline of Thursday. And to your point about asylum, there's a new form that the ACLU is asking these parents to sign before they deport so that they really understand all of their rights. And one of the options they can choose is to speak to a lawyer so that they understand whether or not they still have an asylum case that's pending. Because as we saw before with that old form that Jacob and I reported on, they were given two choices: deport with your children or deport without.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.